Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm one of your co-hosts, Rico Borrego.
I am your other co-host, Tony Borrego.
And this is the podcast known as Relatively Sound, the podcast that slaps another sticker on the drum kit. Now, this week, we have another very special episode, not only because we are continuing our interview with Tony about his album, Good Cause, but we have another guest on the episode. Tony, why don't you go ahead and introduce him?
So this is my friend and drummer and co-songwriter, Bryce Williams.
Hi, it's great to be here.
It is great to have you. We have had lots of fun with our other guests on the podcast, and this will be no exception because you guys both pretty much produced the finalized version of Tony's album, Good Cause, the version that is on streaming services now, the version that came out actually a year ago yesterday, at least from recording this. It came out July 29th of last year, 2022. And we brought Bryce on the podcast because him and Tony basically recorded the album all together. And without Bryce, we might not have had this version of Good Cause release, or any version, since Tony had never really released the first version online. So, Bryce, why don't you go ahead and just kind of give us your brief history when it comes to music, the different instruments you played, when you started playing them, and maybe some of your influences when it comes to musicians and bands.
Yeah, so I started playing drums as my first instrument in high school. I went to this school called School of Rock, no association with the movie. It's this little school where they teach kids how to play instruments with the purpose of getting them set up for doing gigs and stuff live. So they teach you about stage presence and stuff like that as well. And that it's moderately related to how I met Tony is through a friend of a friend at that school. And we started playing some stuff together for, I believe it was a battle of the bands. And then after that, we started working on some of Tony's stuff. And that's kind of how that got started.
And the friend in question is Ishan, who we've had on this podcast before. And it was his school we did the Battle of the Bands for. And as far as Bryce and I doing our own things together, it was kind of weird because I was like, okay, I have these songs. I don't know what to do. So I was just like, hey, Bryce, can you give this a listen? And somehow I managed to reel him in. And yeah, the rest is history.
So what made you actually want to go back to those songs, Tony? Because, for me, when I go back to songs I recorded a long time ago, a lot of the time I'm like, I don't like the way this sounds. And some of them I just try to not even remember that they exist. So what made you go to Bryce with your old songs as opposed to asking him to jam with you on new stuff?
Well, so here's actually how that went down. Was I was just sending him songs that I had. I sent him one that I had and really liked, and then I sent him one I was working on that was really bad. I have not listened to that one since because of its state. But so Bryce and I were trying to figure out how to maybe tackle these songs, and he suggested to go chronologically. So that's when the Good Cause revisions started to happen.
And Bryce, Tony and I, we all the time on the podcast, we're talking about bands that we grew up listening to, bands we like and we listen to today. What are bands what are some of your favorite bands? Just to kind of, I'm curious to see if we all kind of come from the same musical backgrounds, or maybe you listen to completely different things that Tony and I do.
Yeah. So when I started playing drums at School of Rock, I hadn't listened to music really before that, it's kind of funny because I started listening to music because I started playing music and I needed a bass to work off of. And so my first influences were mostly guided by my peers at the school and my teachers and stuff. And I think kind of the direction that obviously rock music is a massive inspiration since the school is literally called School of Rock. So that's, as a foundational level, that's where, it kind of starts with rock. But as it kept going on, I I think I was guided more in the directions of grunge and a little bit of prog, just because that's what people at my school liked at the time. And so they started showing me stuff like Soundgarden, and I started hearing stuff about Tool, like, before I even heard like the normal stuff. Like I hadn't even heard about like most of Led Zeppelin before I was listening to Tool, and I was like, what is going on here? This is ridiculous. And so on one hand, you have like a foundation of like classic rock songs that you could play live, and it were easy enough for like essentially kids to learn and perform to a decent degree of skill. But you also just had like the stuff that people liked listening to, and they would actually show you. And so stuff that I ended up liking. I can definitely name like some of my favorite drummers are Stuart Copeland of The Police, Matt Cameron of Soundgarden, Danny Carey of Tool is really good. I definitely like my old drum teacher called it angular playing, like playing that doesn't really land perfectly as you'd expect. Like it kind of challenges you in a way that not that it's like supposed to be distracting, but if you listen to it, it's not what you would it's not like the most linear way to get to the end, if that makes sense. So that's kind of how I started with drums.
And I can
And
see how you and Tony became friends because, Tony, I'm sure you'll talk about, I mean, like the Police or one of your favorite bands, and Matt Cameron with Pearl Jam and Soundgarden. So I can see how you guys, had a lot of mutual interest.
yeah, and a big thing too, at least for me, that kind of that really drew me to Bryce's playing was for the Battle of the Bands. We actually had a pretty damn good set list we did. I mean, it was only 3 songs, but they were good ones. Tripping on a Hole in a Paper Heart, Cold of Personality, and Walk This Way. And I really noticed how Bryce actually captured the feel of Tripping on a Hole. And STP is one of my favorite bands, so that was super cool. Cold of Personality, like the greatest rock song ever. I mean, one of my very favorites, in my opinion. So I was just like really impressed, and it was really fun, playing with him. And, like he was talking about his angular playing. I'm a sucker for things that are a little bit weird, a little bit off, that kind of challenges the listener. So yeah, I think to me, that's how I really connected with him as a musician.
And Bryce, when you first heard Tony's the songs that would make up Good Cause, what was your first initial reaction to them?
Yeah, well, I know that some of the initial stuff that he sent me were things that weren't on Good Cause. Like we were looking at songs that like haven't come out yet, and like stuff that we're planning to do in various other mediums. But when we started to work on Good Cause, like I remember the thing that initially drew me to Tony was actually not related to music. It was like his initiative, which is I thought was really important. Like he seemed like he was extremely passionate. He was very guided. Like he had a vision and he wanted to get things done. And he was resourceful in the way that he wanted to solve these issues. And I think that was the thing that sold me immediately. Kind of in my background, I'm used to people not really like they're making cool things, but they don't have like a goal. They don't have a dream. They don't have drive to get things done, and it was always a little disappointing to me because I felt like I wanted things to go somewhere. And so that was the thing that struck me about Tony. And when I started listening to his music, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I didn't understand from the start, because like my background as a musician is not in the same thing as the Tonys are. He's more of a like he likes a lot of like he said angular playing, but my background of course is in drums, where it's rhythmically based. Where Tony, I feel like he works a lot on melodic angularity. That's not a noun. That's not a noun, but that was something that was it was something that I couldn't really comprehend at the time, and I think that's something it's taught me a lot through working through this, and that was like a really great growing moment for me.
Well, I'm glad to hear that what drew you to Tony was his initiative, because he gets that from me. No, but to be fair, when Tony and I first started writing music together and playing together, we both really wanted to, record the songs that we were where we were playing and working on, and we kind of did our own like good cause where we released an EP of I think like 5 songs.
Mm.
And kind of like what he did with the original good cause is like I had a friend of mine do the album artwork, and we burned some copies on CDs and gave them out to families and stuff.
Wait,
And
sorry to interrupt you, but there's album artwork for that EP?
yes, you don't remember? It's like a bridge with like a clock. It's kind of like gray. You don't remember that?
Well, after this podcast, why don't you go ahead and send me a JPEG of it?
I take back what I said about Tony's initiative.
Yeah. The initiative is great, but he has a short working memory.
Now, when Tony and I were working on our songs, we had not the best setup for recording. We didn't have a studio or anything.
Yeah.
But I know when you guys started working on Good Cause, was it last year, or did you guys start working on it the previous year, 2021?
Well, it was a little bit older than that.
Older than that?
So, Bryce, with your working memory, maybe you could refresh, but I think 2019 is when it initially started.
Yeah.
And part of why it took so long was definitely, a lack of familiarity with recording and, having to learn big boy software like Reaper. But another thing, too, is that we were in different parts of our lives. I was working at Target and was in school and had a girlfriend, all my time taken up. And Bryce was working on his degree as a computer science major.
Did not have a job.
Tony quickly putting down girlfriends and jobs and careers.
Education.
Yeah. And me doing absolutely nothing. Yeah, exactly.
But, okay, you mentioned Reaper. I was going to ask, what specific software did you guys use to record Good Cause? Like, what softwares, what instruments did you guys have? What were the things that actually help you guys make the album, recording wise?
So the kind of the boring stuff first. We're using a Scarlett 2i2 interface, which is like kind of one of the go-to entry level pieces of hardware, and just kind of like the basic mics to SM57. I ended up getting a SM7B that I'm using right now, and then I had a Strat for my guitar and an acoustic. I can't remember which one I used. I had one from high school, and then I also got a free one from Mike and Rachel, actually, people we know through our parents. And then bass I got in high school as well. Kind of a lot of the old gear that I was using, which is kind of cool that there's some sort of like history captured, within these recordings. At least that's kind of how I feel with it. Bryce, maybe if you want to explain maybe the drum stuff we used.
Yeah. So, for context, so when we started playing, like we were playing in person, and that's how we did the Battle of the Bands and stuff like that. When we were just starting to play, we met in person, and Tony has like a couple pieces for a drum kit, and so I remember some of the earliest things we did were just jam on some of his songs, like in his house, which was just absolutely like miles away from where I was living in Seattle. So like from a collaboration standpoint, it was tough. But after that, 2020 happened, and then everybody got separated, and so that was the start of the main workflow for this album, which was we did everything digitally. And when I would record stuff, I would be recording in my room. And I would be using my E-kit, which I have, Roland TD11, and I would just stick that into my computer, which was running Reaper, and record MIDI onto it, and then I'll send those files over Tony's way, and he would use his crappy Dell computer to cobble together some stuff.
No, even worse, it was HP.
Oh, it was HP.
Whoever at Best Buy let me buy that, there's a special place in hell for him. Do you maybe want to talk about the couple different drum VSTs we used?
Yeah. So so when I would send the MIDI over to Tony, of course, like my drums have a VST built in that plays stuff for me so I can hear it. When I sent it over to Tony, he uses various VSTs to play the MIDI back for the final recordings. When we initially started, we were using a free plugin called the MT Power Kit.
By your suggestion.
Which was just absolutely awful, and like from like a starting point, it was like, wow, like it's crazy we can send like little like little files to each other and then render them, and like it makes sounds, like it's crazy. But we quickly realized that this plugin was absolutely awful, and there's still some old demos where you can hear it, and it's really funny to listen to. But I know Tony was like, I want something better for this. So he did some research, and that's the initiative we're talking about. And he found this VST called the Tony Coleman Kit, which is a much higher end plugin. Like it has a lot of like samples recorded from like in a studio, and it's got all these different settings, and it sounds great. And that was like a turning point where the music actually started to sound like music instead of like random crap that we've glued together. And that was really important to hear when he started sending those demos back to me to listen to.
And things at that point kind of started to sound more correct. The MT Power Kit was like, it's a metal drum kit. There's no holds barred. And so, when you hear like kind of the shoddy demos of mine, it's like songwriter rock. It didn't really work, but the Coleman kit's a much more bluesier sound, and it seems fitting for the music. So like Bryce was saying, hearing that was like promising, and it kind of helped us take further steps.
And I'm glad too that you talked about working long distance too, because that was going to be my other question was how hard it is to work on a project where you guys have to just kind of send each other back and forth files, which now that I'm not living in Washington anymore, when Tony and I work on music, it's kind of the same thing. It's just sending each other back and forth, which can be kind of hard because especially when you're starting a song, it's hard to really jam if you're both people aren't in the same room.
Right.
But I gotta assume it was a little easier since Tony had like all these songs kind of at already some stage of development. One thing he didn't really was the drums, since on his original recording of Good Cause, it was just the drums that GarageBand had to offer.
Yeah.
Which
like the drum loops in particular.
Yeah, back then they GarageBand did not have like the drummers now that where they have names and styles. Like it was just like the drum loops really, or you had to create your own drum loop itself. So I wanted to ask you, Bryce, if you came up with all the drums on Good Cause.
Yeah. So, well, for a blanket statement, answer is no, but we can get into that later. But I'd like to take a moment to note how like working long distance actually deeply affected the sound of Good Cause, which is since we were working remotely and we were doing this workflow, we were just like sending like stuff back and forth to each other. With Tony working on the guitars and the bass and the vocals, and I was working on the drums, and we were kind of in separate rooms at separate times. It really affected it, and is that the creativity that came out of the music was kind of isolated in a way. Like when I was working on the drum parts, so for most of the songs, I'm writing the drum parts. With essentially no input from Tony. It's just a demo that he sent me of like what he has for the song already, and I would be writing the drum part to just like go around that essentially. The creativity that came into that drum part was essentially isolated to everything I was doing, and so you'd expect that like when you're jamming with like a band live, like that's something that you play off of each other. Like you grow the song and you iterate, and it's really easy to do because you're standing in the same room. But when we were playing, when we were doing remotely, it was really just like, okay, I have the only outside influence I have is this one demo that Tony sent me, and it's my job to come up with as much interesting stuff as I can in my time and send it back. So to answer your question, like I'm for most of the songs I'm writing all of the drum parts, and I'm doing so in isolation, and I send them back to Tony, and we kind of say, okay, what worked, what didn't, how do we change the drum track to fit the song, how do we alter the song to fit the drum track, and then we do that several times. But it's a little like fatiguing in the way that like sending things back and forth is tough, and if we're not working at the same time, it can take longer and longer to get even simple changes done. And so I think that was an interesting effect of that workflow.
Was there any times, Tony, where Bryce sent you back, his first take of a drum part to one of the songs that you felt like didn't fit the song, or were you finding you had to give him a lot of feedback, or was it a lot of like, oh no, like this is perfect, exactly what I wanted?
Well, I think at this point in time, especially now that we work in person, we butt heads a little more. That's part of the creative process. And I think maybe in the good cause, we were kind of afraid to step on each other's toes. For me, I was like, I can't blow this. He's my only drummer. Like, he's the only person that I want to work with. And like, so, not that I didn't like what he sent back, but I tried, hard to really be open to it. And I really did like the majority of it off the first listen. There was definitely some things that I had to kind of get used to hearing. I know, for example, I was a little worried in Soon. There's a part where I think you're playing like 5/4.
Yeah, 5. We're doing like a polymeter kind of situation.
Which, I mean, I thought was cool, but I was just kind of, like, I'm used to hearing the song just 4/4, simple beat. Trying to hear my songs with a drum part that changes the entire piece of music it wasn't hard, like, from like, oh, I can't stand my songs being changed, but it was just kind of hard to see it through a new lens. But, I think in general, I was really happy with all the stuff he came up with. A lot of things that I think elevated the song to a new level. There's also some of the songs Bryce definitely threw in ideas to how to change the songwriting, mostly with structures. But I really enjoyed all the parts he had. I think the only songs where he didn't really change was Shadows. I think I kind of had like a decent sketch that he altered, and then the other one being Compromise, which, Rico, that was your doing.
Yes, back when my main instrument was garage band drums, and because we didn't really have it was for the while when we were writing music, we just had like very cheap basic instruments. So like, to me, GarageBand felt so cool that like they had its own guitars and loops and bass and drums. But I think I was just like, you sent me the song and you like weren't feeling something about it, and I just sent you. I was like, well, how can I make it completely different than what he originally created? And for some reason, I was adding these like, what do you call them, like kind of brush drums, like.
Are you asking me?
I'm looking to the drummer right now to answer the drum question.
The question can be up for anyone.
Right. I do remember we did there were brushes on that song at the end, right? Like there was like stirring. There was some other stuff on that. That one was a cool one. I remember that.
And going kind of off what Tony said too, you were saying how Bryce kind of helped you maybe change some of like the compositions of the songs. And I know we talked about this last week of not remembering how all the original songs sounded like on the first version of Good Cause, but there's a lot of songs on this album, like Roll Inside My Head, where, the bridges, and To Do, where the bridges of the songs, they're very grand. There's a lot going on. And then there's songs like Skeleton and Snow, where they have, and even Roll Inside My Head, where they either have like a long intro or like a long extended outro jam. Were those some of the things that, Bryce, that you kind of helped add to these existing songs?
Yeah, so it's interesting you bring that up because I feel like that's kind of like a result of the way that we recorded this album, like long distance. Is that when I would try to write a drum part like on my own, I try to put essentially like as much creativity, as much of my like angular drumming background into it, and then as a result, when you send it back to Tony and he hears it, there's like a mismatch a little bit between like what ended up happening with the drums and what the original demo sounded like, just because of like the fact that we can't work on it at the same time. And I think that the in that way the drums became more transformative, and that we had to alter some of the things about the song in order to fit kind of the direction that we were going. And I think that's something that happens both ways, right? Like there's you would send Tony would send me a demo of something, and then I would shape the drums around that, but then I would also add something else. So when you send it back, we're like, okay, let's shape the demo around the way that the drums have taken this in a new direction. So it was kind of like this give and take that ended up in these cool sections like the one we have in World with the bridges and stuff.
And a lot of times too, like when he sends me the drum part and we kind of like confirm, okay, that's, we're happy with that. Sometimes like when Bryce hears the final song, there'll be like a whole new stack of overdubs on it that he was not anticipating. But to kind of step back for a second, I remember probably like the biggest section that you wrote on this album was the like the third bridge or the third pre-chorus. I'm not sure what you would label it in World Inside My Head.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to explain how that demo you sent came to be?
Yeah, I remember for World with that, must have been, I think it's the second bridge, right? Dreams only work some of the time. Yours have settled, would you like to try mine? Where we had kind of like it was a very rhythmic section, and of course that is exciting for me, and so that's why I think I wanted to take it in a fun direction, to have something that's like very rhythmic focused. And I remember at the time that we were working on this, I was listening to a lot of Yes, and I was hearing all the polymeter and the fun stuff that Bill Bruford was doing on some of the earlier albums and stuff. And when I heard that bridge, I came up with this idea to incorporate polymeter, because I think it had a more simple rhythm, and I wanted to put something on the drums where it wasn't just like, okay, I'll play the drum every time you play a note on the guitar, and then it'll be like, that's the bridge. Like, to me that felt a little, it felt obvious, and I wanted it to be angular, and so we had a section where it was like we had this like this. I wrote it down on a piece of paper because I was like at school at the time, and I was like, okay, let me try writing this thing. Tony's showing me a picture of an anglerfish, not angler as a fisher, like an angular, like an angle. But I wrote down this section where it was, now he's showing a picture of Angular JS, which is
okay, so apparently I don't know how to spell Angular. I'm just going to close out this Google tab. Okay, sorry, Bryce, please continue.
I wrote this part which was a polymeter section, which was, I think it was 3 on the drums and 4 on everything else, and it was kind of difficult to hear on the first try, so I wrote out this big text document to send to Tony that we still have sitting around, which just labeled all of the different hits interacting. And I think when you look at it in that way, the pattern becomes like really obvious. You can see like the repeating sections in it. But to me, I wanted to kind of have this like big looping section where it felt like you were kind of rolling along. Like the things don't line up exactly the same way each time. That's what kind of the polymeter does, is that it doesn't let the same note on the drum happen on the same note with the guitar each time. It kind of keeps looping around and around. I thought that was a really interesting sound for that section. And so that was something that we ended up incorporating into the final version.
I do completely disagree. The way you wrote it out was the most confusing thing I've ever seen. There's like 2 lines of hits, and then underneath it there's 2 lines of the count. Additionally, there's a drums and a bass one. So I remember I literally had to rewrite it on a piece of paper and follow along as I recorded the bass line for it. But it was pretty awesome, though. I liked how it came out.
I don't think they're watching enough Rick Beato then, Tony.
I should have ordered the Beato book, and I would have been fine.
So I was going to ask, but I think I have my answer now. I was going to ask, what song do you think changed the most from the original version of Good Cause to this now new release version? But it kind of sounds like it's probably World Inside My Head. Is that true? Is there any other songs that you felt changed the most between then and now?
I would say World Inside My Head for sure. But I think To Do is a close second. But those two are the most different from the rest of the album for sure. And for those songs, obviously all these songs, they have a lot of changes, whether it's just the drum part or maybe a vocal melody or who knows what. But World and To Do both have like two different sections that are actually pretty dynamic in the song. They really, I think, elevated them to a new level. I don't know how you feel about that, Bryce.
Yeah, well, I completely agree with you. I thought of To Do as immediately as well when I heard that, and I think the interesting thing about To Do is that it was one of the later songs that we worked on for this album, and I think by that time we were getting a better sense of how to play with each other and what kind of direction we were. That was horrible phrasing. How to play of each other's style and how we were going to write these songs and play them. And I think when we got to Do, that gave us some leeway in order to start innovating in the songwriting. And I think the dynamics is one of the first things that we like to look at, because I think one of the things that's hard to get from demos is dynamics, because you're recording it probably either out of GarageBand or from your phone, like from an amp into your phone. It's really hard to get a sense of intensity or any kind of like sound from that, because the quality is so bad. And so I think it was for a lot of the other songs we put those in as kind of an afterthought. Like we're like, okay, well maybe this part could be quiet, this part could be loud. But I think with To Do, when we heard that section in the middle of the bridge, that building part, we were like, we had this idea for this like really grand climax for the album where it would have a lot of like essentially a cacophony of sound that wasn't really present in a lot of the other songs, which are more simple.
It's funny that you say it like that, because I specifically remember. So this song only had two sections from the original demo.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, well I gotta add something else. So I had done the chord progression, and whatnot. It was cool or whatever. And then you did the drum part, and you played something a lot more spacious than I imagined.
Yeah.
Like you started out just with crashes that were synchronized, and then you did some like tom fills or whatever. And then I remember I did my overdubs, and I was like, okay, what does this need? Fuzzy bass.
Yeah.
Perfect. What does it need? Oh, a keyboard solo.
Yeah.
So I sent it back to Bryce, and I remember his response. I didn't know you wanted this section to go off. I would have done something busier.
Yeah.
That was your reaction to it, which that still cracks me up. But that goes to show, I think, how, especially that we weren't working in person, maybe we both think we're looking at something in the same direction, but it may differ. And so there was a lot of really fun surprises. Like I remember, and this actually, it wasn't for, the song off this album, but when we were still sending demos for a different song, I remember I was with Ellen, and she had a glasses appointment, or sorry, an eye doctor's appointment, but it was at the mall. So I remember sitting on the mall bench, rendering out GarageBand demos on my phone to send to Bryce, changing the MIDI, and just being so excited for what is Bryce going to add to the song? What is he going to say about it?
Right.
And so I think for To Do, that was a time where the communication and the different demos, not by accident, but, it came together to create something that I think we both were really pleased with. And I think it's one of our favorite moments off the whole album.
Yeah. Yeah.
Speaking of favorite moments, that leads right into my next question. So thank you. I was going to ask you guys, what song was like the most fun to record, Also like the easiest. But then what was like the one song or two that like took the most effort from you guys? The ones where you had the most revision, like the most like takes.
Nose goes. You go first, Bryce.
Oh God, he got me. Well, I will say that for recording this album, since I did everything on the kit, it was definitely like tough to record stuff because like it was just me and I've never used this technology before, and just like trying to figure all this stuff out was very difficult. So I will say that you're right in a sense that like some of the easier songs like are definitely, let me think about this. I mean, I think I don't think Rainbow took that many tries. I'm pretty sure stuff like Snow went pretty straightforward just because of the way the song is structured. But I will say that I remember one of the tougher ones was actually Skeleton because of um, that song had a lot of weird details in it that I didn't really get sounding right the first time, and I wanted the song to be I wanted to sound like essentially like very well executed. That was a song that I wanted to be executed very well, just because I thought it was really cleverly written. And so that one took a lot of tries to get that that chorus sounding right, to get that outro sounding right. It was like a lot of work.
Grab the skeleton out of the closet and give him a home tonight.
But I also remember, on the other hand, a song that sounds a little more simple, like "The Divine Happy," was also really tough to write. Just because, even though it, like when you listen to it, it sounds a lot simpler, and that's because I thought the difficulty came with the writing that one. Where Skeleton, it came very natural. I was like, I know exactly what I want to do here, but playing it was tough. Divine Happy was the exact opposite. It was really difficult to write because just like the weird verse we decided to put in there, and that chorus as well was like really tough on the drums. But like once Tony and I agreed on something, like it was like 10 seconds and it was recorded.
So actually, I have a question for you, Bryce. As you're talking about this, prior to this album, what sort of like experience did you have with like writing songs and drum parts?
Yeah, so before this album, I had played in one other band with some people, or one of the people who we're actually still playing with now. But that was something that was the exact opposite recording process of this, which is we'd go into the studio, we'd sit down, and then somebody would just show me a riff, and then we would just go from there. It would just be like, okay, here's the riff, do something. And there would be like almost no thought behind it. It was completely spontaneous. And then we would finish the day having it recorded. And then we would just like, the mixing process was pretty rudimentary for that band too. So it was, just like throw it on Spotify and there we go.
So it probably took you 3 weeks to do the album instead of three years for the Good Cause album.
If we had done an album, which we didn't, because like I said, the difference was that lack of initiative. Like we may have done it very efficiently when we were in the studio, but we didn't go into the studio that many times because we didn't have that same kind of drive and vision that Tony had. And so even though the process that Tony had might have been like, very convoluted and it was tortuous, but
I'm not disagreeing.
but it kept going for years until it was done because like you really wanted to make it happen, and that was the most important thing about it.
Well, I will say, going back to the Divine Happy, I've played that one with Tony before, and I definitely get where you're coming from, where it sounds more simple than it really is.
Right.
There's something with like the rhythm of the song where like if you're not like totally paying attention, you can kind of get lost a little.
Yeah.
Which is why it was an early favorite when I first heard these batch of songs from Tony. That one really stuck out. The other song on the album that sticks out is Secrets, because I believe it's the only song on the album that does not have drums, correct?
Yes, that is definitely
Was
correct.
was there ever talk about changing that song at all or adding any type of percussion to it?
Gazing out blinds, the house light was left.
I don't think so. And I had kind of mentioned on the previous Good Cause episode that you and I recorded that it was kind of one where, looking back, I don't really know why I put it on the album. Not because I mean, I don't think it was bad. I'm happy with the song. I think it turned out probably the way it was supposed to. But I feel like it kind of sticks out a little bit. But I think it does actually lead into Skeleton pretty well, which is kind of cool. I don't know if you have any thoughts on it, Bryce. How do you feel not being involved with the song?
Yeah, it's a real blow, but I think like we were on the same page for what that one should sound like. I think like a lot of these songs, like like Tony said, there's a lot of surprises. I think this one we were like, yeah, this one works pretty well how it is. We don't really need to do anything to it, and so that can happen sometimes. I really feel like it doesn't. Like we always end up like modifying things and having to do all this extra work to make it happen. But sometimes it's just like, yeah, we're completely on the same page with what it should sound like, and there's still a lot of cool stuff that can come out of that.
Something.
Oh no, you go ahead, Tony.
Something that kind of reminded me of was, for example, Compromise. We talked about like the original drums being fine pretty much for it, but that song, even though it's pretty much the same as the demo was with the addition of one section, I remember I had sent it to Bryce, and Bryce was like, yeah, the production in that one section works really well, but for the rest of the song, it does not. So something like that, maybe as a whole, there was no surprises really with working on it, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't a lot of revisions that were still required.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that kind of leads me. There was another song specifically that I wanted to talk about, which was Paperweight. And this question is going to be a little bit more directed towards Bryce. I'm curious how, because I've heard one of the only songs that for some reason I have on in my emails, the original demos to is Paperweight from Good Cause. And I feel like the drums in the verses of Paperweight, you're doing a certain type of playing that I'm sure you know the term. I do not. It sounds like you're hitting the stick on like, I don't know if it's like on like the side of the snare.
Yeah.
I feel like that really like drives the song, especially in the verses. And then when you guys kind of go into the chorus, it changes and it really adds a lot of textures to the song. So I was just curious, like how you decided to come up with like that specific drum part, and if there were other like songs on the albums where like you playing it differently kind of adds a new element to the song.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad you bring this up, because Paperweight is definitely one of my favorite songs on this album. This one's super cool, and I think like part of it is that when we were working on the songs and we're getting a lot of demos sent to each other, it's difficult to. So I'll start with this. Like when we do these songs for Good Cause, it was important to me that each song kind of feels like it has its own identity a little bit. They all come from kind of the same time in Tony's life, which gives them that that kind of like cohesion, exactly. Like you can hear how they're related. You can hear how they come from like the same mental state a little bit, and that is really important. But I didn't want the case to be that they all kind of blend into each other, and I didn't want the drums to contribute to that. Like I wanted the drums to kind of bring out the differences in the song. So when you look at it, you can be like, oh, that song was like in this way, and that song was like, it was more, like you were able to tell them apart in a significant way. And Paperweight, I definitely felt that it was a lot. It could benefit from having a lot more energy because of kind of the tempo it was at. And so the interesting thing about that drum beat is like you said, there's cross stick in it, which is that the sound of the stick hitting the side of the drum. And I think that the reason why I did that is because I wanted to maintain the same energy level, which to me meant that there were a lot of like eighth notes, a lot of quarter notes in it, and that it felt driving. But I wanted the second half to sound distinct. Like the second half of Paperweight is a lot different than the start. And the way that I wanted to handle that is I both wanted them to have high energy, but I wanted to feel like it was building. And so when you take away that cross stick and that kind of like more, it's a little bit stranger rhythm, you put in the backbeat around the later half of the song with just like the normal snare notes, and it completely transforms the way that you hear it. It's a lot more. It kind of rocks out a little bit. And so that's why I wanted to hear. I wanted to be the same kind of energy level, but I wanted there to be a distinct, rock out section, essentially.
And what I think is kind of cool, too, is so a lot of, these songs are written on acoustic guitar just because that's what I had at the time. That's how I wrote them. Although even though I wrote Paperweight on bass, LOL. But this one's got an acoustic guitar in the verse. So I thought that was kind of cool that like, oh, well, it's an acoustic driving riff, but there's cross stick in it.
Yeah.
Like that kind of, I mean, I don't know if you would actually say that is kind of hand in hand with acoustic, but I feel like that's kind of a common pairing for cross stick with the guitar.
Yeah.
I do feel like a lot of these songs, because I mean, when I first heard, before you guys released Good Cause, Tony had sent me like, maybe it was close to being the final version, but like at least a version of the album where, it had all your drum parts, and it was the first time I've heard any of Tony's songs or our songs like that. We've recorded when we were younger have actual drums in it, not just drums from GarageBand. And I feel like it really like it turned the songs and transformed them into like a whole new level. Like they felt more like real. Not that they weren't real before, but it added like just an extra layer of like depth to the songs. And I know some of that came from adding maybe different sections and bridges, but like there's so many moments on this album where you guys are really in sync. Like in the bridge of To Do, like just between the rhythms of the drum and the guitars, they're so on point that I can't even really tell that you guys did all this long distance basically. Like it does really feel cohesive, and I can only assume that in the future when you guys are working on songs that you guys are even going to become more in sync.
Yeah. That's the hope.
It's kind of funny though, because not to derail too much, but I feel like this album, I mean, kind of just because of the process, it feels a little Frankenstein. But listening back, I do kind of hear like these songs feel like songs, like you're saying, like they feel like maybe they weren't done remotely. But at the same time, the songs we're working on now, I feel like it's still really disjointed in ways, like using stuff from different demos and whatnot. Yet we're achieving like different results. So I do think the writing process and recording process of Good Cause did breed the results that we wanted, even though it's maybe a little different than how we're going to do things, from this point onwards.
Yeah.
Now, were there any songs that you guys recorded during this process regarding Good Cause that did not make the album?
No.
There was one song I thought maybe either we talked about it before the podcast last week, or maybe it was even on the podcast. I swore there was one song that you said that, like, almost maybe I don't even think it made it on the first version of Good Cause. Trying to think of the name of it. Something like "Drive Far Away from Here."
Oh yeah, and that "Drive Far Away Here" was a song that I ended up actually just finishing earlier this year, but that was not one that I actually had presented to Bryce. So like kind of like I have all these songs backlog that were written, and I mean, I thought they were completed at the time, but definitely have a long ways to go. So this was just kind of like the songs that I was like, okay, this is from the Good Cause era. Here's like 14 songs. There's plenty to work with. Let me show these ones to Bryce. And I kind of, I really love how Bryce was talking about like each song having its own identity. I love that. I don't love albums where the songs blur too much. So I kind of have more the mentality that, here's a song, we can complete it. We can shape it the way we want. I know a lot of bands, they might write songs, or like maybe in Bryce's previous, process with his band, kind of let's jam on something, this is the song, and if we deem it worthy for the album, let's keep it. Where here, the key word is workshop.
Yeah.
We work on the songs. Some of them come naturally and easily, as, Bryce was talking about, and then some of them we labored over. Oh my gosh, but the feeling that you get when you get the song and it sounds the way you want, the vision is achieved, that is what makes it all worth it.
Yeah.
So yeah, these were all the songs we did for the album. None of them really got chopped off. I think the only song that we were maybe thinking was going to be like the bottom of the barrel that I actually ended up really having a soft spot for. Bryce is laughing because he feels the opposite, was Bike. Bryce, maybe you want to share your thoughts about that.
Let's talk about Bike. Bike was extremely tough to write, and it's like it was very similar to Divine Happy in the sense that like for me, I did not know what direction I wanted to go with it, and unlike Divine Happy, I don't think I ever really figured it out. It was like a song that I was completely stumped by, and the beat that I remember I put on that was possibly one of the silliest beats that I've ever written in my entire life, which is no understatement. Like that's a high bar to meet, but I will say that like the way that Bike turned out. I remember we talked a lot about it, and we tried to use the usual process, which is like, okay, what should we add to this? How do we transform it? Like, what is it missing? And then literally I had zero idea. So I was just like, Tony, you should you should take a solo. I'm just trying to fill up that space until we get to the end of the song. And to his credit, the execution was like actually really good, and the more I listen to it, the more I'm like I see the artistry in it. Like I see how like this really took something that felt like it didn't have a lot of direction and give it a new life. And I think when I listened back to that second half of Bike, and even when I listened back to the silly drum beat, I feel like, okay, I see how these ended up coming together, and this is definitely worthy of making it into the album.
Yeah,
Well,
I think that. Or go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say that Bike was also on, when I first gave the album a listen when you guys were still finishing it. Bike was the hardest one for me to kind of get into, just because it does have like, it's on first listen, it's difficult, not because it's like a bad song or anything. It's just it is complex, and it has like different like moods and like vibes that I can kind of see how it would probably be really hard to write to.
Yeah, and I think that is kind of where I was kind of thinking too, is like that song's probably, it's not like the vibiest, out of the whole album, but there's a very strong vibe, and that is exactly why I really wanted to pursue this song. I had an acoustic demo that I really enjoyed, from years ago, but we weren't really quite hitting the mark with the song. And I remember like being at work on my lunch break at Target, just sitting outside on a bench, just listening to the Bike demo over and over. And I'm like, what's missing? Do we add a third verse? What do we do? And I remember a big point was Bryce was like, well, why don't we go back to the chorus? And why don't you take a solo? My favorite words to hear. And that really did the trick. And I think I got to lean into the vibe more. And the result was a much more psychedelic song than anticipated.
Yeah, definitely.
I thought it was going to be weird, but I think the psychedelic kind of area that we reached actually is very suiting to the song. And I'm really happy with how it came out, and I think it was one of the earlier songs we started working on,
Yeah.
but kind of one of the later ones we completed. And I think for me, I think this song was the first one that I was actually kind of happy with the production of. To me, I enjoy listening to it a lot, so it's one of my favorites. Plus, I think it probably has my best guitar work on the album, so
Yeah.
I do feel good about that. To be a little self-indulgent there.
Yeah.
Well, and while we're talking about like the track list, was it easy or hard for you guys to come up with the track list order specifically? Like, did you like know exactly like, oh, this is gonna begin the album, this is gonna end, and there's a lot of laughing coming from this other
Tony's
side.
giving me a face right now.
Well, Bryce,
Um,
you can kick this one off. Let me see how you feel.
Okay. Well, okay. To start off, I like part of working long distance is that it's very difficult to keep track of what is going on because like we're working on several songs simultaneously, we're working at different times. Like it's kind of a waste to just work on one song at once because if we're working at different times and I'm sending one thing to Tony, it's just going to take way too long. And so we end up doing multiple songs going back and forth, and it's very hard to get a sense of what's going on and keep track of it. So I perform my classic move, which I have done so many times, which is just create a spreadsheet, which just just writes down like a bunch of information about like what is happening. And there's got to be at least half a dozen spreadsheets for this album alone.
That somebody who creates them doesn't update.
You have to keep them all updated. But one of the ones we created was for the track listing, and it was tough to come up with It was tough. It was very tough to come up with a track listing because these songs were changing so much that like it was difficult to get a sense of where we wanted to take the listener. And I think the interesting thing about track listing is like Tony like has listened to like thousands of more songs and albums than I have, and so I think he had a lot stronger opinions about the flow of an album, where I was just like I was working off a background of like what would be kind of like what has the most changes in the album, like where would be fun to like kind of throw the listener off and have two songs back to back.
What I kind of notice, and let me say this first. I always find Rico to be the grandmaster of track listings. He always, okay, Rico just sent me a picture of our progress chart, which is basically Excel. So, okay. So, yeah,
There you go.
Bryce and Rico agree that that's the way to go with spreadsheets. And I still cry every time I see one. But what's kind of interesting about track listings for us is that I kind of think of things more as like, kind of like a journey. Like, not that every album's a concept album, but I think it should be structured in a meaningful way. But when you seem to approach track listings, you see them as, okay, let's put all the good stuff on the first half.
Yeah.
And, the weirder stuff on the second half, the
Yep.
deep cuts, which is totally valid. But to me, I never even really considered doing that. And I feel like Rico probably can kind of blend the two approaches, maybe a little better. But, yeah.
I mean, I remember we were talking about like before we started recording this episode, we were talking about how like the three of us we're really into the album format as opposed to like playlist or just listening to songs at random.
Right.
We take the album as like a listening experience, and it's for sure it's by far my favorite medium of any type of music. I collect vinyl and I spin and listen to them every day, basically. So track lists it is very important to me, and I do feel like you run the risk of sometimes front loading an album, and you don't ever want like your best songs to like be 1 through 5.
Right.
But I feel like you guys did with this album was. And we talked about this a little bit on the last episode where I feel like the first like 5 songs on this album are like some of them are the more kind of straightforward songs like Rainbow or Miracle. And I also feel like the first 5 for the most part have a more kind of upbeat sound to them. They're more like major key. And then once you kind of get to the middle of the album near the end, you get some of like the heavier, darker songs like Snow and Skeleton and Bike. And then to me, you kind of reach the pinnacle moment on the album, which is Good Cause, the title track, the penultimate track, and then you kind of end on To Do, which to me is kind of like very similar vibes to the beginning of the album. So to me, it's booked in very nicely.
It's funny you
guys did a
mentioned.
great job with the track list.
Thank you.
It's funny you mentioned like the first half being straightforward and more like upbeat, because when we do the track listings, we write out a mood list,
Yep.
which to me is important, and then we write out an energy list,
Yep.
which I believe that was Bryce's
That's
call.
my.
So it's very cool to kind of look back and see that literally the first 3 songs say happy for the mood list with a little more adjectives after. And then the 4th song is accepting of happy, sad. So it really does start off happy. And then later you get this streak of depressed journey, resentment, frustrated, hopeless, rock bottom, anger, hateful, sad. And this is to end it, turning hopeful, encouraging, uplifting.
Yeah.
So it really is total opposites on the sides, but like you said, comes full circle to end happy again. But I think that actually worked really well for this album, because I think kind of, at least the goal for me, and I think it was kind of obvious near the end of it, that this album had, I guess I would say, some sort of charm. Like, I'm not going to actually compare it to the Blue album, but there's sort of like a immaturity, sort of a, not garage rock, but there's kind of that homemade feeling. We're young, this is our first thing. There's that excitement to it. And so I think starting off the album happy kind of helps, make the album.
So what
encourages that feeling.
What song do you think is your My Name is Jonas, and what song do you think is yours Saying It So?
Bryce, you can answer that.
Rainbow is definitely saying it. So.
I don't know what you mean by that. I don't know what this means, but sure.
My Name is Jonas has got to be Snow for me. So I will say, okay, I will say that I'm glad that we wrote down the Excel like this, because I think it reflects the 2 ways that we think about songs as a whole, which is Tony is a lot more in tune with the mood and the emotions of it, because of course he's written the lyrics to it, and it comes from like that state, where for me, I come from it as like purely an instrumental way, and that's why I feel the dynamics and the energy level a lot higher, because that's the output that I see after we finish. And so when we wrote down the moods and the energy level, it was interesting because we ended up grouping it by moods, but we did not end up grouping it by energy level. We explicitly tried to make sure that there were a lot of ups and downs in terms of energy, so that way we aren't having a bunch of like slow songs next to each other, a bunch of like just blast somebody with the highest energy stuff all at once. It was like it lets you have a more comfortable and varied viewing experience, but in the same sense you get the sense that you're being taken on a journey with the grouping by mood. And so that was important to me, how that ended up.
Is that something you think you're going to try to trademark, is a Excel sheet that says mood and energy?
Yes.
It's the next album cover, is just the spreadsheet for the album. You're mentioning the energy level, and I do notice that it seems like the first half of the album is a little more consistent, while the second half really fluctuates between, we kind of did the energy on a 1 to 4 scale. We get the lowest, then we get the highest energy, kind of alternating in a way, which is interesting. It takes you on a rockier ride near the end. And one kind of funny thing about this is I remember not too long ago we were kind of talking about the Good Cause songs, kind of reflecting, and you had asked me like, oh well, how would you kind of describe Snow? Like, what is it like? And I kind of see it like not like a coming of age, but kind of like a big journey, emotional and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And Bryce was just like, no, I just hear it as a rock song.
Yeah, it's a sick rock song.
So it's funny that we see things different.
I kind of just hear it as a rock song, to be honest, as well.
See, to me, it's one of the most emotional moments.
I don't hear the lyric Garden of Eden and go, oh yeah, he's singing about himself growing up.
Well, I'm not saying it's actually a coming of age.
I actually hear Skeleton is more of like a reflective song.
Yeah. That's a good point. I can hear that one as well.
But I mean, Skeleton also rocks out too, especially like the outro.
That is true.
And funnily enough, is that outro, it was already pretty long, and Bryce was like, "It's not long enough. Make it longer." Bryce, a common theme is that Bryce encourages me to be naughty, to be self-indulgent on this album.
It's totally true. I see myself as the devil on Tony's shoulder. You know, like you have the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder. Except in Tony's case, there is no angel. It's just me on on one shoulder, and he's like trying to ignore me, but there's no ego in the situation. Like there's no one to prevent him from listening to me, which is why it works out so well.
It's only a matter of time.
Or if he does have an angel, it's like an Emperor's New Groove where the angel and devil on Kronk's shoulder just start agreeing with each
Yeah,
other.
exactly.
Well, you got a point,
He's
though.
got a point. There could be a solo here.
So to wrap this up, I did want to just quickly talk about the release of Good Cause last year. You guys, I don't know when you guys decided, but I know released last year around June, you guys were like, okay, I think we're ready to release this here pretty soon. And I kind of, again, talking about taking an initiative, I kind of asked Tony, like, hey, do you guys need help with like releasing it or this or that? So I kind of came on board a little bit and helped, set up like Tony's Facebook page now and Instagram page where it's just his music, not like his personal pages. And we set up DistroKid to like release the album and singles and stuff. And you guys came up with the release date. You guys picked a single. You guys did a music video for it, which was Rainbow on My Shirt.
Which Bryce edited. Shout out to him.
Oh god.
Was there a lot of thought behind like when to release the album? The first two singles, like which ones should they be? Anything like that?
Not really. I don't think. I mean, it was kind of like, okay, we're like done, so let's release it. Summertime felt good. I think that was the perfect time to release it as well. I know the inspiration for the video was Bryce had sent me a full band cover
Yeah.
of Saint Anger,
Yeah.
but it's a pretty sick
Yeah.
cover. It is. And they did the 4-box. Like,
Yeah.
Did they also include the trash can snare?
No, that was intentionally left out, and in fact is one of the biggest changes they made that make it listenable.
the most important change in that video. And as far as the singles, I think, well, we did the classic thing that every band does. We made the single our least favorite song.
Right.
But because everyone, and by everyone I mean my family, was encouraging me to do Rainbow because for some reason they liked that one.
Wait, is Rainbow both your guys' least favorite from the album?
Yeah, it's gotta be.
Probably.
Yeah, see, I now that I've heard like the whole album enough times, I do think Rainbow, maybe it's just because it's the first song and was the first single. Maybe it's also just out of all these songs, besides like probably Good Cause, it's the one I remember Tony playing the most when he first
Right.
wrote it. It's just like an instant favorite, and it's such a feel good song. But now I would probably say like I like Rolled Inside My Head better because there's more going on. I like probably To Do better, and a song like even like Soon. I probably would prefer over Rainbow, but is it just your least favorite because it's like the simplest, the most straightforward? Because I don't always think that the most simple songs are always the worst. I mean, one of my favorite songwriters is Tom Petty, and he wrote some of his songs are like the most basic when it comes to like chord progressions and just bass and guitar and drums, but there's something about them that just they kind of hit you in the right spots, and I feel like Rainbow does that.
Something about the way Petty plays those A chords is just remarkable. He pulls it off. I don't know how, but yeah, I mean, I think just because it was straightforward and kind of simple was probably why Rainbow is our least favorite. What's kind of interesting is the other single, Snow, we picked, well, we really enjoy a lot more.
Yeah.
But those two songs, you had mentioned Rainbow, I had played a lot back in the day. Snow was another song of mine that I felt was standout at the time, and I think it is to stand out now still on this album, which, I'm happy about. I think something else about like the release that was kind of a little bit of a scramble was the artwork. So the album artwork, to just kind of jump in, was done. One of my friends, Ashley, she has a friend who also goes to like art school, and he did the whole album cover. But Bryce kind of led the vision for it. If you want to maybe talk about that.
Yeah, so I think for the artwork, it was interesting because I know like with previous bands I've been in and stuff, it's like the artwork is kind of like not a major point of any of the songs we release. We kind of just like cobble something together and throw it out there because it like, we try to focus on the music. But I think for this one, Tony wanted something that felt good to have on your first album and not just be like, okay, we've reached a point where like we just don't care what it looks like anymore. Like you want it to be intentional. And we reached out to this guy, and I think like we talked a lot about something that would represent the kind of like mood of the album that reflected the time in which it was created. I think we opted over that versus just having some like cool artwork or some cool photos or something. We wanted something meaningful. If we're gonna go out of our way to do this, we wanted something meaningful.
Right, we didn't want someone just doing a kickflip on the front cover.
Even though it'd be
as
rad.
sick as that would be.
But
And I remember you actually, well, you had mentioned the whole concept of it, and you've actually sent him. There was like a movie or something that you like had a reference point. If you maybe want to explain.
oh man, I don't remember exactly what it was, but I remember that the meaning we wanted something that felt nostalgic. We wanted something that felt like we were bringing something back from a long time ago that felt kind of like it was bittersweet in the same way that the album does. It has the happy moments, it has the sad moments, but in all of it feels like it's coming from the past. Which also reflects like the fact that we're re-recording it. But in that sense, I think artistically we opted for a more pleasant creation. Like it's got the softer like pastel colors. Obviously, I didn't do any of this. This was all the artists that Tony found. But our artistic input was that we want it to be like softer colors. They were more pleasing. And I think the core was this idea that we wanted to reflect the long distance approach that we had when we did this. And that's where the like cup on a string comes from, is that it kind of serves a dual purpose. It's like it has the idea of that, like, it reflects the way in which we recorded it, in which like we were in literally two different houses, and it kind of felt that we were connected by like a string, and that's how we were recording it. But I remember Tony mentioned one of the parts about the album is that he wanted it to connect with people, and that's where that idea of the cup. I don't know if you want to talk more about that, Tony. Like like why is it called Good Cause?
Well, I mean, I think you kind of. I think you did I think that was a great idea about like the tin can and how, these two houses represent us. And, you're talking about like capturing the mood. And I think this Ed, and Eddie sort of vibe, that came out
totally.
was pretty fitting. And on the last episode, I talked about Good Cause just being one of the more, the songs where the meaning, is a little closer to home. And I just like that idea, like, this album's a good cause. That's all it is. It's just so people, can hear it. Maybe they'll like it so that we can hear it and also like it. So I guess on like a level, it's not that deep. It's more, I guess, wholesome. It's kind of how I would go. So yeah, Dimitri did this artwork. Now, Bryce, do you want to tell them who did the artwork for the Snow and Rainbow singles?
Oh, could it have been a classically untrained random person named Bryce Williams?
Who uses a like pirated old version of
It's not
Photoshop?
pirated. It's legally obtained.
Okay.
It is extremely old, and For those that was kind of my MO, where we're like, it's like, well, we're releasing two singles, but the artwork isn't as important as the song itself, and so it's like, well, we'll just whip something up really quick. And this is something I've done for other bands as well, just because I own Photoshop, and so that's a pretty, that's a big step up.
Makes you a good candidate.
Exactly. So I won't say that like there's really any deeper meaning behind the two, like the single covers, and they're not even really that well made. But I will say that Rainbow, the whole idea was that it was supposed to be like, you'd expect a rainbow to be nice and colorful, but it's actually kind of washed out, and that reflects like the undertones of sadness that are throughout the album. And the same thing with Snow is that it's just like a very simple silhouette of a snowflake, and because like, the song itself is not super technically complicated, but it's a really fun one to listen to, and it kind of feels like it's there's a lot of simple stuff on the album, but there's also a lot of complicated stuff as well, just like a snowflake.
I think that's
Bryce,
interesting. I didn't really know that.
you should be happy to know that your artwork for the singles, for Christmas last year for Tony, I created him a 7-inch vinyl single of
Oof.
Snow and Rainbow, one on the A side, one on the B
Nice.
side, and I use your single artwork for the front and back cover of it.
Hey, that's awesome.
Except it wasn't a screen capture of the Snow single. Yeah, Rico, do you maybe want to talk about the frustrations you've had with Bryce and the Snow release? Now, this is only your second time actually talking to Bryce, so even though you're pretty involved in the album, realistically, your interactions with Bryce have been quite limited and strained.
The string because of you.
Whoa.
It was hard to. You are not one of the people that text me back the fastest. So it was when I needed an answer on something that I was working on for DistroKid or whatever, I'd have to wait forever for you to reply back to me, and your reply would always just be like, "Yeah," and that was it. We already mentioned it, but I just want to make sure we do shout out the Dimitri was the one who did the album artwork for Good Cause. You can find his work over on his Instagram page called Dimitri Draws. There's a dot in between Dimitri and Draws. If you go to Tony's page, you can find his Demetrius's page there. And then the last thing I just want to ask you guys is, now that Good Cause has been out for a year, you guys promoted it as much as you could. Tony played a couple shows at the Everett Mall.
Spaced out over about a year apart.
Yeah, well, still, I mean, not quite a residency, but, nonetheless. You guys are currently working on your second album. I know that you can't give a lot of details yet because you guys are still in the process. It's not done yet. You guys are still working on it. But what can you guys tell our listeners about the second album?
Well, I think I'll let Bryce share a lot of the details here. But let me just start off by saying when we began Good Cause, we had to pick out what songs would be for Good Cause and what would be for the later albums.
Yep.
And it's a lot of fun to plan things out in advance, to have visions. So one thing I will say is the next album is titled Feed My Fish.
Ooh.
And the only thing that we really knew about it was I had written a description for it. That description was based off a Good Cause, except it was going to be less pop, more goof.
More goof.
And I think we will hold true to that statement. This process so far has been very fun. Bryce, do you have any thoughts about it?
Yeah. So I'll say that just like we try to pick a unique identity for each of the songs, we're picking a unique identity for each of the albums. And less goof is more goof is definitely the direction we took with this one. And I think that I will say that part of the recording process that we're doing it in person now, instead of being completely virtual and sending stuff back and forth. And I think that's been important because I think we've managed to create a lot of more fun, interesting sections on this new album that I think are a lot. They make a stronger first impression. I think they're going to be really fun to listen to.
Yeah, and something that I really enjoyed, am enjoying about working on this album is that you are, by nature more involved since we're working together.
Right.
And you really have been challenging me as a musician, trying to play a song all the way through, trying to, you're teaching me how to chug, how to play metal guitar. So, I mean, it's been a really immersive, writing process, and it's really cool that, we can kind of bounce ideas back and forth more. And I think Bryce, some of his demo playing is actually going to make it on the album, which is really cool.
Oh, man.
So you guys are hopefully going to try to release it this year, it sounds like, if everything goes according to plan.
Yes, that is the plan for sure. We are grinding it out as we speak.
Fingers crossed.
And, we
Cross your toes,
definitely...
too.
We'll definitely down the road, when the album does get released, we're going to be doing another one of these interview type of episodes. Hopefully,
Yeah.
Bryce, you'll join us again for that.
Sure, absolutely.
And because last year when Good Cause was released, this podcast hadn't even been invented yet. So, no, the idea had not crossed either of our minds yet.
Yeah.
So, hopefully, when the album does get released this year, we'll definitely do an episode on that. Bryce, we'd like to thank you for joining us on this episode today. It was great to kind of hear the creative process you guys had to go through with, recording this album. And it was, really cool to hear your guys' like history. And I think it helps add to, Tony and I always talk about the lore when it comes to albums.
That's the best part. It gets so juicy,
Lord.
Yeah. So, it was, and, we might have told our listeners this in a past episode a long time ago, but down the road, Tony and I want to put out our album of songs that we first recorded, 10 years ago, like Tony did with Good Cause. We want to Good Cause our own album and
Give it the good cause treatment.
Good cause treatment.
yeah, which means you're going to help us, add drums to the song. So,
Oh,
hopefully
yeah.
that is something that will get released sometime next year, in between your guys' albums.
Yeah.
So again, that'll be another future episode as well. As we end this episode, we might be able to play you guys a small clip of maybe one of the demos off Feed My Fish.
Ooh.
So either right now you're listening to this as this episode fades out, or we didn't get to it. If I didn't get to it in post, you're probably just gonna hear To Do Again. Whether or not that happens is a mystery right now. But we'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. Definitely go listen to Good Cause. Go stream it. Go buy it. And until next time, you'll be hearing from us soon. So until then, bye-bye.